Good evening and good afternoon, listeners, wherever you might be. Let me take this opportunity to welcome you once again to another of our programs, Straight Talk. As I said before on previous occasions, many have expressed an interest in our program, and our viewership is expanding every week, which is good. It shows that there are people in Guyana and abroad who have an interest in this program and what we talk about on each time we appear on Straight Talk. This is very good because Guyanese in Guyana, particularly those abroad, want to know what is happening in their country. They want to be up to date with the latest, particularly political developments that are taking place in Guyana. And that is quite natural because even though many Guyanese live abroad, they still have that emotional and strong attachment to their country or to their homeland. Many come and many go. Many come for a vacation. They enjoy themselves as we would like them to do. We do not want Guyanese to return to our country or to their country and to be molested, to be harmed, to be injured, and to be deprived of limb and property when they come to Guyana for a vacation. Many Guyanese are concerned also about the crime situation. Many do not want to come because of the crime situation, and many do come notwithstanding what they hear and what they probably would have been told by their close relatives about the crime situation in our country. This has always been a major concern for Guyanese abroad and even those here in Guyana. And so I would say that notwithstanding the difficulties that we may want to think about or harbor insofar as traveling to Guyana, let us look at the bigger picture because it is important to maintain that contact with your homeland. Today, or I should say this week, we will speak about a topic that has gained prominence over the past few days. It has gone viral on social media to the extent that it is now, as we would say, the talk of the town. In fact, throughout the length and breadth of Guyana, many are talking about this problem or about this issue. I refer to the breakdown in the talks between the APNU and the AFC. This is a rather significant development, both from a historical and a contemporary perspective. And it is important for us to understand the significance of what has happened to this coalition. Now, the question therefore is, why do we talk about this? Why is it attracting so much attention? And secondly, is it in any way relevant to the developments in our country, especially with the formation of a number of other political parties in Guyana? Coalition politics will always attract attention because, by definition, it brings together, either before elections or after elections, groupings of small parties to either win the elections, to defeat those who are in the government, or to simply oppose an administration where they have difficulties with their policies. Coalition politics, or what I would describe as alliance politics, have a history in our country. It didn't start only with the APNU AFC, as some may want to believe. And while it may be true that the present generation, who probably grew up before 1990 or just after 1990, may not know much about coalition and alliance politics in Guyana, and they see what is happening today as significant only for itself, it is important for us to talk about coalition politics and alliances in the present day context as well as the historical context. Now, let us start, for example, with the year 1947. That may be a very long time back, but it has significance for what is happening now in Guyana. In the 1947 election that was held in this country, which was held under the first past the post electoral system, which is the constituency system, every candidate had to represent a constituency. You had to make a deposit, as they do, for example, in the rest of the Caribbean countries. And in the 1947 constituency elections, Dr. Jagan won a seat in what was then called the House of Assembly, which is now the Parliament of Guyana, or the National Assembly. Some used to call it the Legislative Council, or the LegCo, for sure. But whatever the name it was, Dr. Jagan won a seat in the House. He was just one person among a large number, I think it was about 47 members representing the business community, the colonial office, and some independents who ruled the roost, so to speak, in those days. In other words, they were in total control of the economic, social, and political situation in our country. So when Dr. Jagan entered the parliament as the lone MP, fighting for certain rights of the poor and ordinary people, he was alone. But in order to get his program moving, what he would do is to seek alliances with independents in the National Assembly or in the House of Assembly to get them to agree on common issues affecting the poor people and the poor farmers in Guyana. Dr. Jagan would meet with these individual members in the House and seek to convince them of the need for them to move a joint motion or a motion in the name of whoever it might be to have it passed in the House of Assembly. That was the first manifestation of working with allies, working with allies, or seeking to make coalitions temporarily or just on a single issue in order to achieve certain objectives that was of benefit to whoever would have gained from the passage of that motion. What was also significant with that development or that policy that was pursued by Dr. Jagan was the fact that you had people in those days in the assembly who would coincide or whose views would coincide with that of Dr. Jagan. And so they found common cause to represent certain issues and get it passed in the House. What this also signified was that Dr. Jagan recognized the importance with working with like-minded individuals who was willing to cooperate on specific issues. It showed also, and a very significant point this is, that people can get together on single issues. In other words, you don't need to get together on 15 or 100 issues. You can cooperate and forge an alliance on single issues, what is called a convergence of interest on single issues for the benefit of the people. And this is important because in today's context, this is an important lesson that we should learn. And so, between 1947 and 1953, while Dr. Jagan was in the parliament, this is the kind of policy he pursued, meeting with like-minded individuals in the House to get agreement on common issues, issues on which they would have convergence or coincidence in order to make representation on behalf of the poor classes of people in Guyana in the colonial days. Now, after 1953, you had the suspension of the Constitution in 1955, and then later on, in 1957, or in 53, another election was held. Now, what happened with that alliance that Dr. Jagan sought? And I should mention this also, that apart from seeking alliances with individuals, an election was held in 1953. Like I said, he won. But then he sought an alliance with a party that was called the Labour Party in those days. He joined the Labour Party, in fact. And the reason why he joined the Labour Party was because he wanted to influence the policies of the Labour Party from inside. Although he would speak and air his individual views in the National Assembly. But those individual views would also reflect, to a large extent, the position of the Labour Party of which he was part. And so this showed that Dr. Jagan, in pursuit of the interests of the poor class of people, he was prepared to go into the Labour Party, which he saw as a vehicle for advancing the interests of the poor working class and the farmers in Guyana. But the Labour Party eventually turned out to be a party that was supporting the colonial government. And this was manifested when a vote was taken in the House on increases in taxes and on the question of adult suffrage, that is, giving the people the right to vote. The Labour Party took the position against adult suffrage, against giving the people the right to vote at the age of 21. You had to have property, you had to own land, you had to be in a particular standing before you could have that right to vote. And on the question of taxation, the Labour Party, instead of opposing additional tax burdens on the poor people, they ended up supporting it. And so that was described by Dr. Jagan as a betrayal of what was apparently agreed to before, but when they got into the House was a totally different position. And so Dr. Jagan realized that this Labour Party which he was part of was not going in the direction which they said, according to their program, they would go. And instead of doing that, they betrayed their own interests and, in fact, the national interests. And with that, Dr. Jagan, of course, pulled out from the Labour Party and began to champion his interests, or the interests of the people in the House of Assembly. Later on, as we continued, in 1953, Dr. Jagan, between 1953 and 1955, he sought to embrace a broad alliance of civic-minded individuals in the fight for national independence. Since those days, he was championing the fight for independence. And I'd like to make this point, that independence, the fight for independence, does not preclude any particular group of people. All must be involved in the fight for national independence, because it is independence for the country, not for any particular sector or any particular group or class of people. And so in his struggle for independence, Dr. Jagan saw the importance of embracing as many people, the business community, the religious community, civic-minded individuals, political parties, and so forth, the professionals, all of these people he brought together in the struggle for independence of our country. And he was successful in that. So this was the alliance that was formed in the fight for independence, and that alliance was to be found in the creation of the PPP in 1950. So from 1950, you had 1953 elections was held, and the government was formed consisting of the PPP. The PPP won the 1957 elections. This was a very important election for our country's history, because it was in those elections, the results of those elections, that saw a number of individuals forming the government. Forbes Barnum was the then Minister of Education in the 1953 government. And there were many others who have made a contribution during that historic period. The Constitution was suspended in 1955, 2 years after 53, because it was felt that the PPP was taking British Guyana in a direction which the British government did not wish. And so they intervened by suspending the Constitution and throwing the PPP government out of office. Elections were held again in 1957. By that time, the split had already taken place in the PPP in 1955. And Mr. Barnum, who was then the chairman of the PPP, and then before a Minister of Education, went off on his own and formed the People's National Congress. And so when the elections were held in 1957, the PPP won those elections. And the PPP was in government from 1957 to 1964, 7 long years. I have spoken before on a similar program, Straight Talk, of the tremendous achievements that took place in this country, transformational achievements that took place in Guyana during the 57 to 64 period. Now I come back just to remind you that we are talking about the question of coalition and alliance policies in the historical context in order to understand where we are today. Because where we are today is in fact a continuation of what took place many years before. And as I said, in order for us to understand why we are at this position today, it is necessary, it is useful for us to understand the history. And while this historical perspective, I must confess, might be to some extent boring for one individual or the other, I think it is important for us to pay attention, as we are paying attention now, to what is happening. Then we had the events between 1962 and 1964, where we had disturbances, riots, racial conflicts in our country. Elections were held in 1964. The PPP won the majority of votes, but the British governor called in the People's National Congress, PNC, and the United Force, UF, to form a coalition government. That was in fact the first time in our history, in modern history, where a coalition government was actually formed between two political parties, as distinct between individuals. Now that coalition government between the PNC and the United Force was formed mainly to get the PPP or to keep the PPP out from office. There was no other principles or fundamentals that actually, or policies I should say, that actually created that coalition or in which that coalition was built. It was deep and abiding hatred of the PPP and Dr. Jagan, and to keep the PPP out from office. And thanks to the then British administration, that coalition was created. But something interesting happened. Mr. Peter de Geer, who was the founder of Banks Beer, which I know some people love, Banks DIH is called de Geer's Imperial House. He was the man that founded Banks Brewery. He was appointed the Minister of Finance in the coalition government of 64. But on entering the ministry, after spending a while in the ministry, Mr. de Geer found that the corruption was so rampant, the stealing of money through contracts, the extravagance was so high that he really admitted publicly that he could not take it. Now, with the PNC holding the reins of power, fundamentally speaking, no one could have told them how they should manage the economy. And even though Mr. de Geer was the Minister of Finance, he really had no powers at all. Barnum was in charge, and de Geer was dictated to what to do and what not to do, even though he was the Minister of Finance and a member of the coalition. Are we thinking about something here that is relevant in today's context? Is there something that rings a bell about what is happening now in Guyana in terms of the APNU and the AFC? We will come to that. And so when Mr. de Geer found that the Ministry of Finance was riddled with corruption, crawling all over the place, he handed in his resignation just 1 year after to the then Prime Minister, Mr. Barnum. He could not survive, and he could not entertain any longer the kind of corruption that was taking place under the Barnum administration beginning from 1964. And so he left around 1965. And that is why when independence came to Guyana in 1966, Mr. de Geer was off the scene completely. And all the showering of praise, all the propaganda that it was Barnum who brought independence to Guyana focused only on him, when in fact it was Cheddi Jagan who was the beginner in the fight for independence for this country. And so after the government became only or solely the PNC, with the United Force now out, kicked out from the government, the PNC became the dominant party in government from 1964 onwards. Now the question was, how could they stay in the government? On the one hand, you had the majority PPP with the majority of votes, and on the other hand, now they had kicked out their ally or their coalition partner, and so they stood alone. Mr. Barnum therefore came to the conclusion that the only way he could stay in government was by rigging elections. And so in 1968, when elections were due, that is where the rigging of elections began. And so when we talk about rigged elections today, especially the young generation, who have little or no idea, with due respect, of what took place in the past, we need to understand that when we talk about the possibility, which many people are talking about rigged elections in Guyana today, for the APNU to stay in office, let us recall that in the APNU, the dominant partner in that coalition is the PNC, which started the rigging in this country beginning from 1968, after they had kicked out the United Force, their coalition partner. But there have been many other instances of attempts at alliances and coalitions in terms of the politics in our country. The People's Progressive Party has been making many efforts to bring people together, to form alliances, political alliances, to form electoral alliances, to form alliances to fight against dictatorships, etc. And the most important of this development came when, prior to the referendum that was held in 1978, a referendum in this election was due in 1978. Elections were held in 68. Elections were held in 73, where the army intervened, and because of rigged elections, and elections were due once again in 1978. What Mr. Burnham did in the PNC was to postpone those elections and instead hold a referendum to ensure that the PNC had a 2/3 majority in the parliament. And so elections were postponed for 2 years. I mentioned that before. And it was during that period of the campaign against the referendum that the PPP formed an alliance, or I should say entered into an alliance, with a number of other political parties and organizations called the Committee for Defense of Democracy, the CDD. That was a very powerful force. I was fortunate to be in that organization as a member of the PPP. And the PPP, together with the PCD, boycotted the referendum. And less than 10% of the electorate went out to vote. The whole city, the whole country was very deserted on that particular day of the referendum in 1978. And then elections were held 2 years after in 1980. Those elections were rigged again. And subsequently in 1985, Mr. Burnham died and Mr. Hoyt became the president. Mr. Hoyt continued with the rigging because it became almost impossible for the PPP, for the PNC to ever win elections at a free and fair contest. In the entire period, throughout this entire period of rigged elections, I need to emphasize that the PPP was always seeking to form alliances with like-minded partners who were interested in this fight for democracy and free and fair elections. The fight for free and fair elections is not concerning one party. And in fact, if we are to fast forward to today, and you listen to what the political parties are saying, all of them, including the APNU and AFC, which you know is sheer hypocrisy, including them, all the political parties today in Guyana are talking about free and fair elections. The question is, it's easy to talk, but will it be done? That's where the challenge is. It's easy to talk about free and fair elections, To have free and fair elections is a million-dollar question. And so I want to emphasize that the question of coalition and alliance politics, beginning from 1947 to today, has been an issue that has always confronted the political parties and the political process as it evolved in our country. 1974 to 76, the PPP advanced what is called the call for a National Patriotic Front and a National Front government, including all of those who wish to defend the interests and to represent the people of Guyana. It was interesting that at that time, the Working People's Alliance, the WPA, had put forward also a program calling for a government of national reconstruction. But here's the difference. In the PPP's call for a National Patriotic Front, the PPP had included the PNC. Dr. Jagan felt it was necessary to have the PNC in such a front and government. The WP, on the other hand, was totally against that. And in their call for a government of national reconstruction, they excluded the PNC. And that is where a divergence came between the PPP and the WP on what kind of government should this country have to replace the PNC in office. The point, however, should be stressed is that continuing along the annals of history, the question of coalition and alliance politics have always been around. It has never disappeared. It has always been there. The PPP also made efforts to work with all the other political parties in pre-electoral alliances. Before the 1990 elections, an organization that was called the Patriotic Coalition for Democracy, the PCD, was established. Again, here the PPP worked with the WPA, with the Democratic Labor Movement called the DLM by Paul Tennessee, and some other small organized parties and organizations. Again, the fight there was for free and fair elections. And again, here we see the formation of a pre-electoral alliance to remove the PNC, then Mr. Hoyt, from office. There were discussions to move from a pre-electoral alliance to a post-electoral alliance. We were not successful with that because there was a breakdown in the talks around a common program, which the PPP was pushing for. In the 1997 elections, the PNC transformed itself to what is called the PNCR, PNC Reform, where they brought in some other organizations. It seemed as though they were mimicking the PPPC. The PPPC was created just before the 1990 elections. And the PPPC, meaning People Progressive Party / Civic, went to the 1992 elections as an alliance of a political party and civic individuals who were not members of the PPP to contest the elections. Here again, we see the formation of an alliance, this time again, between a political party and individuals who were not members of a political party, but who came on board as individuals in an alliance to contest the 92 elections. That was a very important development because, again, I emphasize that as we could see, beginning from 1947 to 1992, the question of formation of alliances and coalition politics was still relevant and valid in the context of Guyanese politics. Not something that came out of the blue. It's something that was always there. And in fact, as we will see in the 2015 elections, the PNC, having changed from Corbyn to Granger, made an alliance with a number of small political parties and created the APNU, the Alliance for Peace and Unity. Later on, that alliance, called the APNU, made a further alliance with the AFC, the Alliance for Change. So here you see another interesting development in terms of the formation of alliances and coalition politics in our country. Meaning the PNC now forming a coalition or alliance with a number of small political parties, including the WPA, which is part of the APNU. That's an alliance of political parties. I think it was 4 or 5 of them. The WPA, the Justice for All Party, the United Force, and the PNC, and there's another smaller party that is there. So 5 parties, small as they are, came together in an alliance called the APNU. That alliance went a step further and entered into an electoral alliance with the AFC to call themselves APNU plus AFC to contest the 2015 elections. We know what were the results of those elections. It was controversial. It is still being debated. There's a petition in the court that has not been heard as yet, amazingly, as some people would say. And in fact, creating more or less juridical history, where from 2015, an elections petition is in the High Court, and elections are soon due, and that petition has not been heard. That's history. That should go down in the Guinness Book of Records. So, my friends, here we are today with the following. The People's Progressive Party, in alliance with the Civic, the APNU AFC, and about 4 to 5 other political parties that have been formed over the past year or so. What does this mean for the coming elections? Now that we have discussed what has transpired in our country from 1947 to now, we can understand better and appreciate the situation as it is today, especially with the current formation of new parties and alliances. We can understand why we are where we are today. Well, as I started out from the beginning, the big issue today is the fractioning or the cracks that are being created in the APNU AFC alliance. And what does this mean for the future of this coalition and the elections that are coming? Everybody knows that separated, they really don't stand a chance. I'm not giving any advice here. That's not my job. All that I'm saying is that PPPC contesting the elections with APNU AFC going on their own like they did in the local government elections last year or this year, and with the other political parties forming out there, we never know. It is difficult to predict seriously or precisely what will be the impact on the electorate and what will be the outcome of the elections when it is held in 2020, if it is held in 2020. Because some people are even saying that they might want to postpone it further. We don't know, and we don't want to speculate on those issues, but as it is, on the surface, elections are due in March of 2020. My friends, we are at a very interesting and exciting period in our country's history when it comes to elections, coalition politics, and alliances. When the history of this country is written on this subject, it will be a very interesting one. Many people know that one of the countries where coalition alliance politics have been a very dynamic process is in India. It's one of the few democracies where coalition politics and alliances is part and parcel of the political culture of India. Guyana, it appears as though we are going to be a country where coalition and alliance politics will play a very important and defining role in charting the history of our country. Politics is not about speculation. Politics is all about intelligently anticipating based on history, based on contemporary politics and so forth, in order to determine what the future holds for our country politically. But as it is now, we are at a very exciting period of our country's history, and let us keep our eyes on the ball when it comes, for example, to the situation that is currently unfolding with the quarrel that is taking place between the APNU and the AFC, particularly around the prime ministership issues. Because as you know, whoever becomes the prime minister from the AFC, I think the major concern of the APNU is that if Mr. Granger doesn't last out, the prime minister becomes the president according to the constitution. And this is one of the major concerns of the APNU-AFC. We operated differently when Dr. Jagan died. We managed the process very skillfully and very statesmanlike. So we had a cool and easy transition from Dr. Jagan, Sam Hines, Mrs. Jagan, and then Bar Jagdeo. Will they be able to do that? Who knows? Time will tell. So my friends, let us keep our eyes on the ball. Let us keep following with deep and abiding interest the political developments in our country. Because politics, as we know, has to do with economy, has to do with social life, has to do with all life and living in the country. So let us continue following and paying attention and interest in the Straight Talks program in order that we may be educated on what is happening in Guyana. I thank you once again for listening. Until next time, let us continue the conversation on Straight Talk.